The event is from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. and the setup will begin at 8:30 in the morning. And the other outreach opportunity is going to come up starting in January. We're going to start scheduling and taking signups this fall. Is a engineering after-school club at a high school in West Philadelphia. So again, if you guys are interested in doing independent engineering outreach activity, please talk to me. There's absolutely no rules on what you can or cannot teach. We ask that the activities are hands-on and interactive, so students can kind of investigate and play around with some of the engineering topics. If you guys are interested in putting together anything that's based on your research or personal preferences, talk to me and we'll schedule you guys. Thank you.
Alright, if you guys have any questions about the events that you heard, you can always email dgwiseboard@gmail.com, and then we can answer your questions, provide you with further information, that kind of thing. If you haven't had the chance to grab pizza, feel free to grab pizza and take a seat at any point during the panel. We're going to keep it very informal and as a discussion, so you can always ask questions whenever you want. But the way that we're going to start is we're going to have each of the panelists introduce themselves. So we have an excellent panel with professors, fellow graduate students, and someone from the fellowships office as well to kind of cover some different topics. So each panelist is just going to kind of say their name, what their involvement with the university is, and then if you want to say what information you have that's kind of relevant to the panel, so we know, or they know where to direct their questions if they want, you can add that as well. Start.
My name is Alan Lau. I come here for the pizza. Other than that, I'm the graduate advisor in mechanical engineering and mechanics department. Over the years, I have seen many young people apply to graduate school. Some of them come to me to ask for advice, and some just apply. So I have seen many scenarios and cases, and be happy to share what I know with you.
Hi, I'm Meredith Wu. I'm the Assistant Director from the Fellowships Office. I can talk to you about any international or nationally competitive sources of funding for you while you're in grad school. I also, prior to coming here, worked for 9 years at the Graduate Student Center at Penn, so I have some generalist knowledge that I can share with you too about navigating the certification process.
I'm Jen Stanford. I'm an assistant professor in biology, and I've kind of taken an interesting career path that's led me through a number of things that, for whatever reason, I've ended up working with graduate students quite a lot because I'm passionate about it. So before coming to Drexel 6 years ago, I was at Harvard Medical School, where I spent 4 years developing curriculum there and supporting graduate students and mentoring graduate students. And then as I came to Drexel, I've also played a role. I haven't had my own graduate students, but I've spent a lot of time sort of mentoring grad students through various issues and things that have happened. So I'm happy to address those kinds of issues.
Hi, I'm Alyssa Willingham. I'm currently a PhD student in Atoms, Antiquities, and Atomics Lab. This is also my 7th year at Drexel because I did the BS MS program as well. If you have any questions from transitioning to PhD,
You're also an MSF grad.
I'm also an MSF grad.
I'm Professor Caroline Schauer. I'm an associate professor at Drexel. I was the grad advisor for material science. I stepped down this year, a more freedom in the schedule. I developed a course. We title it The Art of Being a Scientist. It's teaching first-year grad students everything they need to know throughout grad school. And it's based on a book. If you ever have any questions on what you should be doing as a grad student, how, are you the only one that's dealing with situations? This is a great book, and I'm happy to talk about the course and anything else we have our students learn from it.
I'm Dr. Sue Killem. I'm a professor of environmental science in the Department of Biodiversity, Earth and Environmental Science. I've been the graduate advisor for the environmental science program for a long time. I've been at Drexel for 23 years. I've successfully mentored 18 PhD students and a dozen master's students, and have 2 PhD and 1 master's still to go. Anyway.
Hi everyone, my name is Sinan Asiri. I'm a fifth-year PhD student in biomed. I switched out once towards the end of my second year, and I'm here to talk about that experience. Was it easy? Of course not. Was it worth it? Absolutely. Do I recommend it? It depends. So I hope I get to talk about those questions and those experiences that I kind of went through.
All right. So to start the panel off, something that every grad student experiences, whether you're looking for an advisor when you're applying to grad school, or you're trying to decide on what type of research you want to do and find an advisor in your first year of grad school, or you're thinking about switching from a master's program to a PhD program, everybody faces how to approach and how to find an advisor that's going to be your PhD advisor. So I think that's a great place to start the conversation. I don't know if anybody wants to start with something, and then if you guys have questions, just raise your hand. You want to start?
I'll start. The advisor-student relationship is not only beneficial for the student, but also for the advisor. I consider my prodigy, my students, as my future, right? So they're my grandchildren and children. In fact, one just gave birth, so that's my grandchild. So you want to find someone that you're going to want to have a relationship with for the rest of your life. Because they're going to be your supporting mentor there for the rest of your life. I call it my advisor for small things. Hey, I got this grant. Can you help me figure out what kind of student can I do for you? There are many personalities of advisors. In fact, the book has a whole listing of them on how to deal with those. So you have to find someone that you want to mesh with. They're in the lab all the time, and you find that suffocating, and you don't want that kind of lab. You want to find someone who's graduated students into the field you want. So if they have a track record of getting students into industry and you want to go academics, you might want to think about another advisor or see if they have the connections. I have a track record of academics. I have very bad industrial collaborations, so students going from my lab go into academics because that's my connections. You want to find someone who you could interview the lab. That's the best thing you can do. See who's in the lab, see if they're happy. See if they've been there 7 years, not from BS, but 7 years for a PhD, and they're just miserable. You know when you walk in a lab, you have that gut feeling that's not a good place. You want to be happy, you want to find the project that makes you get up in the morning at 4 a.m. to run into the lab to do the experiment. You don't want to find the project where you're struggling to get up at 11 to make it into the lab. That's kind of general. You're supposed to be happy. It's the best years of your life. It goes downhill from there.
Well, it's also important to include the lab because the other students in the lab can also help you if your advisor is super busy. I find it very beneficial. We have weekly lab meetings without our advisor where we go over more specific goals, and that kind of keeps us on track. Whereas with our advisor, our meeting is kind of what do you need and general overview of like what you've done in your project and where you need to go.
A couple other things that we're thinking about is where is the person on the tenure process? You know, if the person is new to the school, well then you're not going to have to worry about that necessarily during your graduate career, but if they're sort of midway through the tenure process, you may end up going through a situation where that person doesn't get tenure, and then you have to decide what to do, and that can be a challenge. Oftentimes you can go with your advisor to another institution and finish up your degree there. You still get your degree from your home institution, right? So, but that's something that, you know, I've seen a few people deal with during their time in graduate school, and it is a challenge. I've also seen people that had to make the decision to actually start over with a new advisor at that point because they wanted to stay at that institution and finish their degree there.
What does the tenure have to do with whether or not you're your advisor?
So basically, if a person doesn't get tenure at an institution, they end up having to leave that institution. And so they can remain your advisor, but you'd have to go with them to a new institution to finish your degree, to work with them in your lab.
And then they go into industry.
Right.
Talking to my brother.
If the person's already tenured, then you're not going to have to deal with that during your time. Or if the person just started, then it takes 6 years at Drexel, so you would probably be done by the time they would finish. So that's another thing. All the things that were mentioned, Caroline mentioned, are really important. That was just another thing to think about.
One of the things I would like to add is that why a student may be looking for a professor to be their advisor. Advisors are actually constantly looking for capable students to be their student, because professors many times write proposals to external funding agencies. If they obtain a new grant, then they need the research assistants to work with them at junior times. So therefore, as you are approaching the professor, be mindful that they also have a need to look for good students. So it's not a one-way street. You are trying to get a professor who will hire you. They are actually have a need to look for capable students whose ability and whose interests match the needs of the project they have. So it is a mutual direction, not a one-way street. The second thing is professors are human beings too, so they are all kinds of human beings. So never commit to a professor if you just talk to one person and say, okay, this is a good one, that's it. You know, just like making friends, talk to a lot of people and decide who you want to be as your friend. And for professors also, you should talk to every professor in the department you want to show an interest in their field. And only after you talk with everyone, and maybe you talk with them more than once and go into the lab and make sure that their students are not sad-faced, then decide whether to work with that professor. Of course, the professor may not take you as a student, but at least you can narrow down that way. And with database of multiple interactions of multiple people. And also in graduate school, never just to apply to one school. Never just to apply to Drexel Physics Department and work with Dr. Taglin. You need to apply to more than one university. Dr. Taglin is one of the best professors I know. But at any instant of year, a professor needs to receive a new grant or new funding in order for him or her to have open slots for new research assistantships. If there's no funding, the professor is not likely to fire their current PhD student and hire you, right? So that said, it means that the best professor at Drexel may not happen to get new grants at the year you want to apply. However, another professor in another institution happens to have a grant. So for those reasons, you need to put your odds in more than one basket. Apply to one more university, two more universities, three more universities. Buy yourself several lottery tickets and see which one wins.
Let me answer it. I'd like to point out two other things. One is, it was kind of covered and suggested to talk to your peers and other students. I want to mention that although it's good to gather information, and always do that, do not rely on one source. So talk to as many students and as many peers as you can, but always judge the information as a whole. Because every one of us, we may have some, there is one particular incident that kind of made me, not satisfied with a particular professor or the way he responded to me. So it could, whether I like it or not, it would affect the way I judge, or I might, have an opinion about it. But so if you talk to a large, group of people and then analyze that information as a whole, then that would, I'd say you would have a clearer picture of the professor or the way they interact with their students. The other thing is, I think the best way to learn about the lab and the project and the professor is to actually immerse yourself in the lab in that situation. So in the 6-month period that I was looking for a lab and I was trying to find advisors, I literally talked to every single professor that had a kind of research interest overlapping with mine. In fact, I even approached Dr. Saylor, and she openly accepted me and allowed me to attend their lab meetings. So the only way that I could learn about her research, her students, and the kind of work they did in the lab was that I actually go sit in the lab meetings, see the work that the students present, the kind of discussions that happen. So I think you have to, it is a big change and it is a big decision, so you have to devote some effort and time and actually offer to do rotations, to volunteer in labs. So that's definitely helpful, and I think the information that you get is much more accurate than just talking to others, to their experiences.
That is an excellent point. If you happen to be still an undergraduate student, there are many opportunities to get engaged with a professor or a group in a topic that you're interested in. You can take a course with that professor, do a project in the course, or you can take, in our department, there are special topics course which you can register for 3 credits and do a research and get 3 credits, and you can do that with a professor. Or you could volunteer to be a work study in their lab for 3 months. That serves several purposes. Number one, you are part of the group, and you can actually see for yourself whether what you think you want to do is really that interesting to you once you are actually have to do it. And number two, it also gives the professor an opportunity to observe you and work with you, see if you are the person that fit the need of the project. It is kind of a matching process. Just if you want to buy a car, you want to at least do a try run, right? You don't just watch a video and then buy a car. So doing a project, taking a course, or even in our undergraduate program, there is many opportunities to do that and try that, and then it is not just a case of getting the credits for the course, but it's a case for, in a real time and real situation, for you and the professor on mutual sides, find out whether there is a good match in your interest, in your ability, and in what they have to offer. And I know more than one case that before the student completed the project, both the professor and the student encourage the student to apply for graduate school, and then the professor actually is working on writing proposal with some plans for the student. And those are very valuable opportunities. And how do you get those opportunities? Just talk to the professor.
Well, my department is a little bit different than this, and that's because we're a new department and 2/3 of the faculty have not had graduate students before because they were from the Academy of Natural Sciences, which didn't have a graduate program. And so in our case, because we were building a new department, specific faculty, and we had a limited number of TAs available, and nobody had research grants that had money for graduate students already, then we brought students in to work with specific faculty members. So the matching happened before they arrived on campus, not after. And so that's a different situation. There's different things that you have to be careful of in that kind of arrangement. But once you get here, you already have a professor to work with, and there isn't any choice either way involved after the fact. So it makes it very important for that student to visit. In this case, we made sure the students visited the campus so they could talk to each other ahead of time. And I will say also, just to add that, once you are in a lab, it's very important to make use of your professor and your committee as you go along, and don't be shy about that. Never guess what your professor is thinking. Never do that. You go and you ask them, okay, yeah, what do you know, this experiment didn't work. I've been really mulling it over whether it was my fault or was it something else, you know? What do you think about it, all right? What do you think about this result? So you have, and for other situations too, you have to go, don't guess, go and ask. You're all very
I think that's an extremely good point. I have had so many students in my office and then had their advisors in my office. And their main issue is them not talking to each other. The advisor is frustrated because the student isn't coming to them with their concerns. And I think there's this feeling on the part of the student that maybe they don't want to hear what the advisor wants to say, or maybe the advisor is happy with them, and the best way to handle that is just to be upfront and to talk about, you know, what do you think, what are your concerns? And that goes from the beginning to the end when you're starting to think about the next step. I've seen a lot of students run into problems where they're afraid to talk to their advisor about what they want to do for a next step. And the advisor is not going to help them. So, you know, trust that this is meant to be a mentoring relationship and that that person is there to support you as you develop as a professional. And so, you know, use that opportunity to really get that help from that advisor. They want to help you for the most part.
And you have a committee, a whole committee, all right? And students do not make enough use of their committees, in my experience. And so as a mentor to students, I'm always saying, well, go ask so-and-so, you know, they know more about this than I do. Especially your outside committee member that you choose. Very important person in your life. You've chosen them because they have some expertise that's really necessary for your dissertation. And you need to make use of that outside person as well. So really make a lot more use of your committee than most students do. I really, really encourage that. The more brains that attack a certain issue, the better off you'll be.
I would just add to that and say not just for your dissertation. That grad school is about, you know, doing your dissertation research and advancing knowledge, but grad school is also about professional development, right? So you should take advantage of these potential mentors on your committee and anybody else that's around, other faculty in the department, to ask questions that you might feel stupid asking, like if I want to go to a conference, how do I do that? Or how do I submit a paper? Or should I go? Or when do I publish? How do I publish? All of the questions that you might have about becoming a professional scientist or academic of any other sort, these people are your resources, and you should really take advantage of them as much as you can. It also allows them, as you're asking those questions, to get to know you, so that later down the road when they need to write you letters for the job market or for fellowships or for anything else, they can give a rich account of who you are. So really sort of take advantage of this opportunity to build relationships. And don't be afraid of them. They're nice people who were once exactly where you are. So, you know, knock on their door and if they open the door.
And that reminds me to tell you to join your professional association as well. As a new graduate student, you don't often think about doing that, but they have reduced rates for graduate students, and you should do that for sure. And you should go to as many professional meetings as you can get to. Nothing is really more important than that in building the network that you're going to need for your future career.
Earlier, a couple of times we mentioned talk to the professor, talk to people, apply. I think that you're all smart people. I look at your face, I don't see a stupid one. So everyone is smart, right? So, but why do sometimes smart people kind of refrain from talking to professor or applying for scholarship, applying for research assistantship? Sometimes is that we are also human beings and we have a human nature of we don't want to be rejected. We try to talk to this professor. What if he or she said, I don't want you as RA or I don't have RA for you? So that kind of inhibits us and makes us talk to less people or apply to less scholarships opportunities. But I once was like that because I was stupid. But I remember in graduate school, because like graduate student, I was poor, so I have to share with other graduate students. So we rent an apartment. Each one of us have our own room, but we share kitchen, share sitting room, and so forth. And there was this guy. He came from an international country, but every summer at those days, he went to the suburb to sell Encyclopedia Britannica. And those days before the internet, Encyclopedia Britannica was pretty expensive. Many $1,000s a set, and so each family, they have a couple of kids, they bought a set and they put an installment payment. And so every summer he went to the suburb and knocked at the door to sell. And for the 2 summers that we lived, shared the apartment, every summer he got a big tag saying that he was the salesman of the year of that group. I said, this guy have an accent, and how can he go into all this higher middle class communities and sell expensive set of encyclopedia? Turns out that he said they gave him excellent training. They said that you should go to knock at every door. When you knock at the door, 90% out of 100 times, they will say no and close the door in front of your face. And that's normal, number one. Number two, they quote a number. They say, according to our statistics, every 102 no's, you will get a 1 yes. So each time the door closes to you, you say, yes, I'm closer. No, yes, I'm closer. So you just knock at the door, hope they say no, so that you're getting closer to a yes. So he said, with that, I am always enthusiastic knock at the next door. Because as soon as they say no, I know I'm closer to a yes. So when I'm not sure whether you should talk to a professor, apply to a scholarship, you say there's no downside. When they say no, it's just as if you have not applied, but only then you are closer to the next yes. It's number one. And number two, actually all those scholarships or professors, they have a dilemma. Each scholarship, each year, they must find a number of people to fill the scholarship. And each professor who get a new grant, they must get an RA. They have needs to fill up their opportunity slots. So it's not that you are begging them for something, you are trying to give them an opportunity to satisfy their needs too. So with that understanding, I hope you could be more courageous, and whether you decide to talk to the professor and not apply for this scholarship or not, just do it. Remember, everyone who wins a lottery ticket bought a ticket. So you just buy yourself a ticket. If you get a no, that is the same if you did not try.
When students are approaching either you as faculty members, what do you find the most impressive? What's the most likely to make you say yes to a student? And then from the student's perspective, what have you found that has worked the best for you? Whether you're approaching a professor to be in their lab, or applying to a fellowship, or looking for a collaborator or something like that.
Some simple things. When I was very young, I was taught that never approach a person to ask for anything when he was hungry. So don't try to approach a professor, before lunchtime or 15 minutes before he has to teach a class. Those are the times that their attention, either biologically they want to have food, not interested in talking, or they have to prepare for the lecture. So the first thing talk to the professor is, when is a good time to talk with you? When we can have some time together. Find a time the professor is in a mood to discuss with you, then rather than to knock at the door and insist you must talk about your application at that time. Secondly, present yourself before the meeting with a resume or CV so the person knows a little bit about yourself. And also you have a chance to show him your experience and your capability, your interest, then it is a more informed meeting. And a meeting is an occasion for people to determine matching. So the more of information you give the other side, and the more information that the other side give you, that means that you have to do some homework, look at the internet and see what their interests are, talk to their student, then the better is the matching.
I think be prepared. So that's what I would say, just in brief. I can't tell you how many students have come to my office for an interview or whatever, and they can't answer a basic question about, well, why do you want to do this, whatever it is. That's a simple question. So be prepared for that, but also be prepared, know something about that faculty member, maybe know something about, have read their most recent paper or a couple of their papers, so that you know a little bit about the kinds of research that person does. Clearly, you're going to want to know that if you're going to be deciding whether that's a lab you want to join anyway, so that hopefully is obvious. But, excuse me, a number of people just aren't prepared at all, and I think that really distinguishes between somebody that you want to work with and somebody that you would.
I completely agree. I think the thing that worked for me is when I went to my advisor and kind of knew what I wanted to do, and we just had basically a discussion of what project I could work on.
Energy. I need someone to want to do the work, right? I need someone who will be excited about what we do. So having prepared and coming in, when I say, well, yeah, we're working on butterfly wings, I want that energy to come through. Also, I choose group members based on the cohort. So right now we're training for a so I'm not choosing runners, but I'm choosing non-runners to become runners. So we have group activities like that. So I choose people based on how they're going to fit also.
I always ask them how they became interested in science in the first place. It's sort of what drives them towards this career. Because if you're not driven, you're not going to do a good job. And so I always ask them for the sort of historical perspective on where they got there. In my experience, and I'm old, so I've had a lot of it, you have a project that you think, I went to graduate school to do a specific thing, to work with a specific professor. And when I got there, he just left to go to Europe for 3 years on a NOAA, whatever, excursion. And, oh my goodness, So I had to change completely. So I did what everybody said, go and talk to a lot of people and then choose someone. In my case, because I was an oceanographer, there weren't very many opportunities. So I had to completely change what I was thinking about doing to another project. So, and then that professor left right after I finished my candidacy exam to go to another university. So I essentially was my own mentor as a graduate student. And what that taught me was that I could accomplish my goals, whatever they are, on my own. It gave me a lot of self-confidence, and building self-confidence is what graduate school is all about, I think, basically. So you have to have the fire to want to do it. And many times opportunities have come up and I've completely changed what I've been working on. And that's happened to me a dozen times during my career. I call them accidents of fate. So you need to have students, when you're choosing students, that you know can roll the punches when they happen. And that's what I look for when I'm talking to potential students to work in my lab, to see how committed they are, but also their, the breadth of their knowledge and field, because you never know where it's going to take.
And actually, that's a very good point. When you are very young, but there will be an age when you are 90 years old and talking to your grandchildren. At those age, you realize that when you think back, most of the things in your life, including career life, most of the knowledge at least, you actually have to learn it yourself. So when you look for a project, look for a professor for PhD topic, don't be limited by, because I took such a course, then suddenly I'm very interested in this topic, and that's the only topic I will do my PhD thesis No, because there could be a million other equally interesting or very, very exciting topics out there, only you have not had a chance to be exposed to it. So keep your minds open and talk to more people. And remember, any new knowledge that you need for your career, most likely you have to learn it by yourself anyway. So find a professor who has that kind of mentality to mentor you how to learn, rather than just pigeonhole yourself in one small topic and one professor.
Does anybody have any more questions? Any questions?
All right, I have another question. So say you find, the advisor you want to do, the project you want to do, but that advisor doesn't have any funding available for the project. How do you go about, getting outside funding?
How do you go about it? I would say there's also other sources of funding, right? So as a grad student, there's TAing, there's RAing, there are internal sources of funding. In terms of seeking external funding, it depends on what stage you're at. But in general, any sort of large fellowship that would take the place of lab funding, you need to be applying a year out. So, and the fellowship cycle roughly parallels the academic cycle. So in the fall, if you need funding for your second year, you should be applying in the fall of your first year. And if you're at Drexel, I'd say the first place to start is to call us at the fellowship. Email us is better. Email us at the fellowship's office, set up an appointment. We'll figure out what sorts of funding is out there for you. But then funding will come up again. There's funding for first year, second year grad students. There's funding once you're established and have a project, and then there's sort of writing up funding when you're really at the end of your project. And at every stage, you need to really reassess whether that's a good idea for you. And then I can tell you, last year was $1.5 billion in scholarships and fellowships for the asking, and a lot of it people don't find because it's in professional associations or it's sources that you might not think about. Everybody knows about GRFP and IndySeg and SMART and these big awards. If you're a woman, there's AAUW. If you, almost all the, especially the engineering professional associations, I know have funding available to you. So really it's about using your research skills to figure out a match between what it is you want to do and who really wants to fund that.
Now, if you talk to a professor and you really like his field and he really like you or she really like your ability, but he or she happen not to have new funding, so then it's natural that you ask the professor, who would you recommend me to talk to that may be likely to have funding? He may have friends in the same university, he may have friends at other university, he may have fellow PhD student when he was a PhD student, now is teaching at University of California some days, and he can introduce you to something. And if you really like the field, like the professor, then he is one of the best person to recommend you to talk to next. And of course, next is the seek other people's money, look at the scholarship and fellowship in the offices. And then sometimes you can be flexible and say, maybe there are other equally good topics which I'm not exposed to yet. When in my undergraduate, I went into college wanting to be a structural engineer because I saw my father as a structural engineer there. It was cool. But then I have a very good professor teaching mechanical engineering topics. Then I suddenly realized buildings are not moving, it's not dynamics. So I changed, followed the professor, become a mechanical engineer. But I go to graduate school, almost half of my class, now looking back, later turned out to be not mechanical engineers. They turned out to be medical doctors, they turned out to be lawyers, and the rest, maybe a large portion become professors. But when I went to graduate school, my real interest was actually in psychology, not in engineering. But as an international student, there is no research assistantship for psychology at that time. And my only option is get a PhD, and if with research assistantship at the university that I want to stay in is in engineering. So I decided to have a compromise instead of go to PhD in psychology, get a PhD in engineering. It turned out that that is not the worst decision. So if you do not get research assistantship or funding with this professor in this particular field, he or she can introduce you to someone else in other university in the same field. Or you can ask around in your university who else has funding, and maybe you can change the field slightly. Maybe if you knock at the next mention, you open the door, you may actually like it.
Can I just add on that briefly that I think there's some self-reflection and some serious conversations that have to happen before you decide that external funding is the way to go. That I can't answer that question, but there is sort of the question of whether you should try to be in a lab that doesn't have funding for you or not, and whether you really are committed to that project. That you will all have individual answers for whether it's the right idea to try to go bring in your own funding, but that's a time to really seek counsel of your mentors before you sort of pick a direction.
I want to add to that there's another option that's available to students here at DGWISE. And it may be a stopgap measure, but you can go out and co-op if you're a master's student, and you can go out on a paid internship if you're a PhD student.
And actually, I knew a person who got a PhD from another university. He got his bachelor's degree, he applied to a professor who did not have funding for students. So he's a US citizen, so he ended up getting a job in the research lab as a technician for a year and a half until the professor got funding and they switched back into a PhD student. In our department, in mechanical engineering department, we had a PhD student who came in from being a student at Penn. He joined our department as a staff member in our department's headquarters. And then he worked for a professor to write a proposal, a Gantt proposal, a block grant. And turns out very successful. She has talent in writing proposals. And after also a year and a half, Professor got a large grant and she switched back into a PhD student. And so there are various ways. If you really want to get a PhD in science and technology, this country has many opportunities for you. But you need to be flexible. Don't say it must be a Drexel with Professor Lau. We're happy to say that if you want to, but you should be ready to talk to other professors, talk to many other universities where this opportunity is. This country needs a lot more young people go into science and technology. And you have one of the commodities that is enviable. You are young and you are energetic and you want to go to science and technology. Number two, this country, like most developed countries, the working population is aging. That means we need young people to go into the workforce, particularly in science and technology. So you are the group that many of these slots for scholarship and PhD are actually courting and seeking, only you don't know it yet. So you have to make yourself available and try to apply.
Does anybody have any questions? All right, I think the last topic that we wanted to cover was what are the options if you start researching in a lab and you figure out that you don't like your research? Is it possible to switch labs? Kind of what are the options that are available and how do you go about doing that?
Can I start? So the first thing I'd like to say is that I think what we should have is like the last step towards that process. It's very common, it's very natural that in research oftentimes when you start a project, things doesn't work out the way you anticipated, or even your interest may develop and change over time, which is exactly what happened in my case. So I was working with a professor. He was amazing. He's a great mentor. I'm still in touch with him, and I appreciate him a lot and respect him. But what happened was when I started my PhD program, my PhD studies, my background was mechanical engineering, and I started a degree in environment. So there were a lot of researching and kind of like self discovery. You know, I was looking into, I was doing rotations, I was reading things. I had an idea of what I wanted to do, but I did not know the specifics or the details. So over the 2 years that I worked with that professor, as I took classes, as I talked to people, my interest started to change and kind of shift in a different direction than my professor. And even though he was very helpful and we were talking about it up front from the beginning, I got to a point that there was no, it was not impossible to kind of work on the same project, because I was, and at the end of the day, it was a decision that I had to make.